Well, hey there, everybody. I am going to do a little bit of something that's kind of off the cuff today and a little bit out of the norm because usually we talk about video games, tech, motorcycles, cars, that kind of stuff. Um, but I want to do something a little bit different for y'all because we were in the process of buying a house, and I thought, this whole experience has taught me so much. I think I could probably save somebody some headache. And what I'm talking about today is old houses. I'm not going to talk about, like new construction. There's a whole different world of nightmares out there with that stuff that can happen. But we're going to talk about old houses today and the things to watch out for. And I'm not going to name names. I'm not going to throw anybody under the bus. I'm not going to make claims of deception or dishonesty or anything like that. Because at the end of the day, it would be intellectually dishonest of me to make those claims when I don't know what those people are thinking. What I will say is what we were told about the house and what we found out about the house were two very different things. Now, from a perspective of buying a car, as a buyer, I want people to be transparent with me about their car. If I'm buying an expensive car and you say, yeah, dude, like the rear suspension shot needs to be rebuilt, the bushings are worn out and the ball joints are kind of shitty, we gotta replace those. But hey, everything else is pretty good. Did a tune up recently, did this, did that, just changed the oil. I did the throttle body gasket and this and that, and oh, this needed fixed, and oh, and I replaced the map sensor. Cool. I have a pretty good idea where it's at, and at least I now know some of the things that are wrong with it, and I know some of the stuff that's been done. This person I feel like is being pretty transparent with me. Let's go take it on a drive and see. Um, that's more of a green flag because realistically, there's always going to be something on a car, even if it's minuscule. And houses are very similar. Houses are very, very similar. If a seller is being transparent with me, I'm more likely to trust you and I'm more likely to go for this house. If I start to feel like there's things that are either being hidden or omitted or just don't line up with what was said, that's when I start to go, And again, I can't say this person's purposely being deceptive or they're lying or oh they're just full of crap or they were trying to they were trying to pull a fast one on me. I can't say that that's the case. I can just say that from a perspective of the buyer, that doesn't make me feel very good. And I'm less likely to trust the transaction because I'm starting to see things not line up. And that makes me go, maybe I want to go do business with somebody else. So let's start with the house. We started to fall in love with the house. And my dad told me something that resonated with me it's going to stick with me forever. And he said, my father told me, never fall in love with a house so much you can't walk away from it. And I was like, yeah, that's a pretty good saying. Makes sense. Now that we have backed out of this transaction, could not be more true. I did fall in love with the house, and at first we were very unwilling to walk away from it. But as we started to peel the layers back, it was like a fucking onion. It was just layer after layer after layer after layer after layer. So starting out with the house, we went and we looked at it. Beautiful house, Victorian house, original old oak floors, hardwood floors, original windows. The trim looked very original. Just this beautiful, beautiful old house. And we loved it. And we started noticing a little bit of stuff, like, the fireplace looks like it's, there's a little bit of weird cracking in the mortar. I don't know anything about chimneys, but I'm like, that's probably not totally normal, but maybe it's aesthetic. I don't know. Doesn't seem like the end of the world. And then we hear, well, the sellers have never used the fireplace. We're like, that's weird. In a house like this, dude, why wouldn't you? Well, that should have been a red flag. Start counting your red flags. I don't know how many red flags. If somebody counts them all and puts them in the comments, I'm curious. So that should have been a red flag. Okay, so then we start going through the house, and we're in the basement, and we start noticing it's raining outside, and the basement's starting to fill up with water. We're like, that's weird. The drain hadn't been snaked in so long for the basement drains that water was collecting in the basement, like standing water. And I'm like, all right, well, that's an easy fix. We just snake the drains. No big deal. We start walking over to where the fireplace was, and I start seeing these boards that look discolored. And I'm like, I mean, it could be water damage, maybe. It's hard to tell. Discolored, old, but it looks like discoloration from water damage to me. So that was a little bit strange. And we started noticing that there's a lot of old electric in the house. Not super uncommon with old houses, especially in this town. There's a lot of old historic houses, and old historic houses do sometimes have old historic wiring, which you should have like a professional electrician take a look at. We feel comfortable enough with the house, and the sellers gave us the inspection report from the buyers that had pulled out. And we were like, why'd they pull out? And they were like, they pulled out of the transaction. We didn't get a lot of information why, and that felt weird. That should have been a red flag for me. There's one of the red flags, again, is when you see another buyer pull out of a transaction and there's an inspection, see if you can get it. In this case, we were told that there would be several inspections and that we could look at all of them. When we got the email, we got one duplicated twice. And I was like, that's weird. Again, I can't say one way or another if it was intentional or not, but it was weird because I was like, hey, where's the other inspection report? Oh, I'll find it and get it to you. Never got it. Red flag. Again, can't say if that was intentional or not, but as a buyer, I'm starting to go, this is a little bit weird. So we look at the inspection report, and it mentions some cracks in the mortar in the chimney, and it mentions like the roof doesn't leak, it's just old, as far as like the inside, like the boards and stuff, but the roof is good, and they told us, oh yeah, the roof's good for like another 10 years. We're like, all right, cool. If it's got that much life left in it, not too worried. And mentions like, the panel's old, but it should be replaced, and like these could be a fire hazard because sometimes they just don't trip if something goes wrong. We're like, all right, well, if the worst we have to deal with is fixing some mortar in the chimney, and fixing the water in the basement by snaking the drain, and maybe we got to get this panel replaced. Not the end of the world. Let's make an offer. So we made an offer. And we didn't make an offer for the asking price. We actually went lower. And it was accepted. We were like, didn't expect that. So we were like, all right, now we've got this 10-day diligence period. Let's get an inspection out here. Let's get an inspector. Here comes the next red flag. The listing agent was like, we gave you an inspection. Why do you need another one? Now, if I'm going to use car analogies because cars are my language. If I go to buy a car and I say, hey dude, I'm interested in this cool expensive sports car. Can I go take it in for a pre-inspection report at Bob's Garage? And they go, no, why would you want my car inspected? That's a red flag for me. If you have nothing to hide, if you know that your car is in good shape, if there's nothing daunting, then I would expect that person to be like, yeah, I don't care. That's fine. Just tell me when. Because they know now that I'm serious about buying this car. I'm not wasting time. I'm willing to put my money on the table to pay for an inspection to get this car. So, listing agent's like, why do you guys need one? We just sent you one. Here's something else that you need to keep in mind. When you make an offer on the house, you have this diligence period. And again, check your contract, check your local laws and regulations. But you usually have this period of time where you can order inspections, look at the house, make sure everything is what it was reported to be, and you can pull out if you need to. You also put earnest money in for that period of time. And that earnest money is like, hey, I'm serious about buying this. So here's a deposit. And if I pull out during this diligence period, I get that back. But if we proceed forward and I break the contract, you get to keep my money. So during this due diligence period, we go ahead and get our inspection. It comes back, and things don't start lining up. This inspection over here does not match this inspection over here. Now, in my contract, it states we can disapprove of the house based on the inspection. The inspection was like, the roof is actually damaged and actively leaking. The sewer drain in the top is leaking. The boot around the chimney is leaking. That's where you got your water damage. And there's leaks on the roof in different places. We're like, oh. Roofer comes out same day that we get this back, and he's like, dude, this roof is toast. It has not got 10 years of life left in it. You'll be lucky if this thing lasts till the summer. It's degranulated. They're shiny. They're warping. Looks terrible. It's actively leaking. You need this fixed. We're like, oh, you gotta be kidding me. Next item on their inspection report, that's a big red flag, is that panel, but the fact that it appears that there has been do-it-yourself wiring done. Because he was like, yeah, these were double locked on this circuit, which shouldn't be done. I don't know any electrician that would do that. And some of this is modern wiring that looks like the grounds were not, they were either clipped or they were disabled or they were just not wired in, because this is an ungrounded panel. And I was like, yikes, bro. So as a buyer, here's something that you should also do. If you see work that was done, if it was a renovation in a kitchen, if it was wiring, if it was plumbing, if it was structural, if it was an addition, call the city and see if any kind of permits were pulled. Because if they were not pulled, they were probably done by a handyman or they were done by the owners. Now, there's a couple caveats to this. Most of the time, you're going to find that people do simple stuff all the time without that, and you might be fine. But like legally, well, you should always pull your permits anyway. You like talk to any kind of contractor. They're going to be like, yeah, of course you should pull your permits. So in this case, the city only went back 24 years of history. That's all they have in their computer system. And we were like, well, hey, the bathroom's been renovated, the plumbing's been done, electric's been done, and I just want to know like who did it so I can check the permits and make sure it was done right. They're like, there has not been anything other than one permit pulled for this house for the last 24 years, and it was to replace the pipe from the meter to the house. And I was like, ugh, oh yikes. Okay, well this is starting to explain so much. Now if that happens, I mean, are you on the hook for that? Not necessarily, but you might be. So here's some things. Let's say you buy the house as a rental, and the rental needs some repairs, and you find out that it wasn't repaired correctly. You're probably on the hook for that as a landlord. Let's say for some reason you need to have something done and repaired on the house. Let's say you need to have electrical done, and it runs through this addition of the house. And the city comes in to inspect it, and they go, what's this? That doesn't belong there. That doesn't match up with what I've got here on the report. When was that done? Oh, that was done by the last owners. Oh, well, that's not up to code. You got to fix that. Now you are on the hook. There's also another part of this, and this is an interesting scenario caught by our real estate agent about a previous house. The sellers had tried, not this house, totally different house, totally different agent. They had tried to sell the house as a 2,000 square foot house, but the report showed that this house was a 1,200 square foot house instead of a 2,000 square foot house. Well, the city caught on to this somehow, I don't know how, and they went out and looked at it, and they're like, well, this isn't a 2,000 square foot house. We're showing that this house is 1,200 square feet. And they're like, oh yeah, we finished the basement. Well, they had never reported it. So the city was like, well, how long ago did you fix that? 3 years ago? Well, your house needs to be recalculated, and you're going to owe back taxes because you now owe on this extra finished area that was not calculated. So in that case, they ended up owing back taxes. So there's another way that you could be on the hook. The other way that you could be on the hook, and this is another scenario that our real estate agent gave us, was the appraiser came out to the house and said, this needs to be fixed, that needs to be fixed, that needs to be fixed, that needs to be fixed. Not this house, totally different house. And the seller was like, okay, I'll fix it. And so the sellers fixed it, but they paid a handyman to come out and do it on the cheap as they could. And when they came out to do that, they were like, this doesn't look right. Let me see your permits. and they didn't pull permits. So the city caught wind of this, came out, and they said, okay, that's not up to code, that's not up to code, that's not. They ended up forking this guy for $25,000 worth of repairs on this house because the city basically was like, you got to fix all this stuff. This isn't done right. And it cost them dearly. So, are permits important? You should probably check and see if they've been pulled. If there's a lot of renovations done, there's additions done, check to make sure permits were pulled. It's not to say that the work isn't good. It's more the fact that if something ever happens in the future, you might end up being on the hook for it. You don't want to have to deal with that. So make sure it's been done right. There's also the possibility of getting retroactive permits. A good example of this is, like, let's say somebody goes in and does electric on a house, and they find out that it wasn't done with a permit. You can usually go back to the city and say, hey, I didn't know. I'll pay for the permit, have the city come out, inspect it. They check it off. They say, looks good. You got your retro permit. You're good to go, bud. So there's that as well. But you should always just double check as a buyer. And in this case, none of it was pulled. So we knew it wasn't done legitimately. So at this point, we're starting to go, yikes. Maybe we should start pulling out of this. This is starting to look pretty scary. We were looking at the kitchen, and we noticed in the report that they had mentioned that it looked like there was water damage at one point in time. And we noticed that the linoleum had been cut in front of the dishwasher, and the dishwasher was new. And we were like, that's a little bit weird. My dad said something very interesting. He said, this house looks old enough where the linoleum looks ugly enough that it might be asbestos. And I was like, asbestos in the linoleum? I didn't know that was a thing. But apparently in the 70s and the 80s, lots of linoleum was made out of asbestos. So we had another inspector come out, and they took samples, and they sent them off to a lab, and lo and behold, it came back asbestos. So now we've got the roof is actually leaking when we were told that it was good. There's water damage from that, which we were told was because the chimney didn't have a rain topper. There's do-it-yourself electric with no permits pulled. There's a bathroom renovation with questionable plumbing done with no permits pulled. There's a chimney sinking through the floor, actually angled, going like this. There's all kinds of stuff starting to just glare at us through this house. And we decide it's time to pull out. If I were to rewind time and I was to go back and I was to look at all this stuff, I would have a very different eye for it. One of the other things that I noticed, and the inspector that I picked for the second opinion, this was after we made the offer. We went back to look at it, and we noticed that the beam in the kitchen was doing this. And we were like, that's really weird. It wasn't significant. It wasn't huge. It was just, I noticed it. And when he went up in the attic, the previous owners or the sellers or whatever had apparently been using this area as storage. We're talking like shelves and crates and big heavy stuff all up here on this non-reinforced beam, and it was sagging it. And that's a problem. It looked like maybe somebody knocked it out at some point in time, like renovated this house. Like maybe somebody broke the beam out and then like opened this area in the kitchen up so it was dining room instead of like having this structural wall. So there's another thing to look at is if a house has been renovated, it's an old house, and somebody's redone the kitchen or the bathroom or knocked out a wall or something, anything like that. Have they pulled permits? Is it done up to code? Were those structural walls? Was that a structural beam? Is there anything supporting it? Is that going to be a problem? Have an inspector come out and tell you. See if you can't get the blueprints on the house. Compare the blueprints of the house, like the construction of what you show, the floor diagram. You want to take a look at the floor plan and compare that to what you see now. Has it been changed? If it has, is there a record of it being changed? Because here's the thing, and my real estate agent said this is becoming a problem, and there's an awful lot of people watching renovation shows on TV who go and buy houses and flip them, who have no idea what they're doing, who just see all this stuff and then they just go do it. And they don't know what they're doing structurally. They don't know how to do it properly. They don't do it up to code. They just make it look as good as they can, and then they go and flip it. And it ends up being a nightmare for the next buyer. I'm not saying that flip houses can necessarily be bad, or not necessarily good, but you should cover your ass for sure. Like definitely do your due diligence. So I hope all this information helps somebody. Um, if I were to start from scratch, the things that would have set me off in the first place would have been, why do you have a problem with me getting another inspection? Um, why did the original buyers pull out? There's been 2 buyers now that pulled out. Are we really that lucky? Because it sounds like we're lucky, but maybe we're not actually that lucky. There might be a very good reason. Why didn't I get the other inspection report? That's weird. Why did these inspection reports not line up? The first couple of red flags should have been enough that I just walked away and didn't even make an offer. In the future, I'll probably be gauging the seller agent a little bit more just to kind of get a feel for the transparency. And if it feels like they're not willing to be transparent up front, if there's weird things going on, like uh, I'll probably just pull out of it early on. Um, if you get into the weeds, if you make an offer, always get an inspection. Always cover your butt. You will inevitably lose that money. You will not get that money back. You might spend a couple grand on inspections. When you go into buying a house, you should plan for at least spending a couple grand on inspections. Sometimes maybe a little bit more, depending on how big the house is, the specialists that have to come in, especially if you're buying an old house. You might have to pay for an electrician to come out. You might have to have a chimney inspector come out. You might need to have an arborist come out, which we did as well. You might need to have somebody come in for environmental stuff like asbestos. There's so many different things that can happen in an old house. We even had a radon test done, and the radon test was a little higher than I would have liked to see. It was like kind of borderline on needing a radon system, but it wasn't quite there yet, but still not good. And that was another thing. So these are all things that you should prepare for if you're buying an old house, is save up enough money. So I mean, let's say you do get a good example is FHA loans. They say 0% down. What they don't tell you is the 0% down is you're probably putting in for an assistance, which is like its own little thing. Like it's almost like its own little loan kind of. It's almost like you're taking out 2 loans. Kind of weird. It's like down payment assistance, FHA. And then on that 0% down, they don't tell you that there's still going to probably be some closing costs and there's going to be some stuff. Um, and that's probably going to cost you a little bit. In this case, I was told my out-of-pocket total would be like $1,500, and I was like, cool. Realistically, by the time earnest money is deposited, by the time the inspections are done, the out-of-pocket, the appraisal, closer to 8 grand, somewhere in the ballpark of that. And that wasn't really clear until we were in the thick of it. Now I got most of that money back, except for the inspections. So always budget way more than what they tell you, because that stuff's it's not very well disclosed and super transparent. You might get lucky. Maybe you find a mortgage broker that is going to tell you everything down to the last penny. Maybe they can calculate all of that. But they don't tell you about the inspections. Like you think, okay, we need an inspection, and then you find out a specialist has to come in, then another specialist has to come in, then another specialist has, then another one. And before you know it, you're just like, man, $200 here, $400 there, $800 here, $400 there, $500 here. Oh crap, it's adding up really fast. So prepare for that. Make sure that if you are like, man, I want to have a rainy day fund while I'm doing this, make sure that you have budgeted enough money that you feel very comfortable to where you're like, okay, I'm not worried about having to do this. That's fine. We can spend that money on the inspections. We know we're not getting it back. We know we're going to have to pay the closing costs. I'm still comfortable with this amount over here that I've saved up for a rainy day. That's just my recommendation. Do whatever you want. Just letting you know if you go into buying yourself a house and you're not used to doing that. It's very different today than it was 15 years ago. When I bought my place 15 years ago, the zero down was really zero down, and they had a program where first-time buyers had, I think it was like 8 grand towards all their costs. It literally cost me nothing out of pocket. Now those same programs, which aren't the same programs, they're different today. They've changed drastically, and so you need to be very careful and make sure you triple check all of the costs before you get yourself into it. The other thing that I see a lot of people doing from mortgage brokers is this whole like, oh, buy down this with this money. Um, Very similar to what they used to do before the 2008 crash. I remember this creative financing that they used to do. And they would say, oh, yeah, well, we'll just put you in this thing where your interest is almost zero, or it's going to be this much for a year. And then after that, it'll go up. But, if you're really good at fixing this house, you could flip it and make so much money. And that's how people lost their ass, because people would get into these creative financing programs. And then they couldn't afford to flip the house, or the market took a shit and now they were upside down and they couldn't get out from under the house. Well, in a year or two, that interest rate changes on them, and now their payment is exponentially bigger. They can't afford it. They had to walk. And they're doing the same thing now, but they're now doing it through a buy down program. So what they're trying to talk people into is like, oh, hey, if you get concessions from the sellers, we can have them buy down your rate, and it'll go towards this for this many years. And if you sell your house within that time, you don't have to worry about the rate going up. Well, yeah, but if you're going to be in here long term, do you really want to pay a 8%, 9% interest rate? Probably not. Um, and right now, I think they're like 6.8 or something like that. Still not great. But just be aware of that if you do the buy down, calculate what your payment's going to be later, because you don't want to forget about that and be caught off guard. You don't want to be in a position where you're like, yeah, that sounds great. And then you find out 2 years later, now your payment's changed another $1,000 a month out of the blue. That might suck. Maybe keep an eye on that. These are all just some of the things that I ran across during buying this. Either way, I hope this saves somebody some headache. And if you have any questions or specifics or anything like that, leave them in the comments. And yeah, hope you have an awesome day.